It starts on page 281, Chapter 8. Now, I want to give you, some context. If for some reason Maya doesn't make it today, my hope is everybody will make it tomorrow, okay? And if we do that, then tomorrow, all right, you guys, we still have to do tests, written tests for 6, 7, and after today, 8. Max still has to make up 5, all right? So what my hope is at a minimum, tomorrow we'll do 6. You can do 5 and 6 or whatever, okay? And you'll work on that, finishing up the hands-on. Then we do 7 on Monday, 8 on Tuesday, okay? And we'll just see how it works. We need to take our second hands-on test next week, and I want to take it no later than Wednesday. My hope is next week we will have time to not only get all those tests done, but also get into chapters 9 and 10. Your next test won't be on 9 and 10. But 9 and 10 are, for lack of better words, they're different kinds of topics. And what I mean is, you asked yesterday about floating stuff, left and right, etc. That's not used much anymore. All right? They have a thing called Flexbox, which kind of throws stuff out on the screen where you tell it to throw it out. You'd be like, whoa, that's a lot nicer. Let's use that. That's what most new development uses. But there are millions of websites still out there that use floats. You know what I'm saying? So. You will end up using it in chapter 9, all right? But for now, the idea is you keep using floats, because if it turns out that you go to work and let's say you are a web developer and you're doing maintenance work, if you say to your boss, hey, this is done with floats, I can make it look the same and be better with Flexbox, they're going to probably tell you, don't change it because it isn't broken. Type of an idea. All right, so I'd like you to try to do it with floats. All right, until we get to that point. All right. So what I told them is we're going to go over chapter 8 because we weren't sure if you were coming or not. We're going to do that first. Then how about, we'll take a break after that. Then we'll do the written test. We'll go, over again with, our review, and then we'll take the written test for chapter 6.
Okay, I thought we were taking the test when we first got here, so I have a meeting with David at 9:30, so should I go see him now instead?
Who is David?
Mr. Markowitz.
Oh. Is it going to be a long meeting, or don't you know?
I mean, I just need to go talk to him.
No, I'm not asking what you're talking about.
I know, I'm just saying, I don't really know. It could be like 15 minutes.
Okay,
minutes.
we'll work the test around it. Okay, we're going to go in chapter 8 right now. The reason I would like to do it that way though is Luke is coming in today, and it's a waste of his time for him to come in if I'm lecturing. See what I'm saying? Because the idea is that's the tutor. Yeah, and he was here yesterday. He will be here most days that we have lab. He will be here. All right. So I want to show you one of the things. I'm going to give you the code for this, but I want to show you one of the things that we're going to do today. All right. And let me bring this up. Let's see. Don't worry about that. That's garbage. We'll go over later. That will go over later. All right, this is it. Now, this is what this chapter is about. I'm going to run this program. Okay, you're like, what? Widescreen. Well, if I click here, it tells me my current width of the screen is 1264 pixels. Okay? Watch what happens when I start to make this thinner. Did you see how it changed from widescreen to normal? See that? All right, but now look at the size. It's 1188 pixels, so I'm going to keep going. All right, now it's about 728 pixels. All right, keep going. And now it's about 500 pixels. So this chapter is on responsive design. So in other words, this would be the way we would want something to look if it was a smartphone. That's, how we'd want it to look if it was a tablet. If it was normal, meaning like a laptop. And if it was an extra wide type of device. Now, it's like, what are you talking about? Colors? No, it's the sizes that matter. When you work with responsive design, that's what matters, is the size. You want to make sure that if you were looking at something on here, that you can read it. All right, it's much easier to read something on a laptop than it is on a tablet. It really is. All right, and it's much easier to read something on a tablet than it is to read it on a phone. That's just the way it is. All right, even if you've got really good eyesight, it's still easier. So that's what this chapter is about. So I'm going to give you this code. There's not much to it, about 100 lines or so. All right. So we'll talk about that later, and we'll go over it. So it says in the first 7 chapters of the book, we learn to create and format web pages. Now we're more concerned with screen design. All right. And what you'll see in here, it says the 3 components of responsive design. Okay. So what are they? Well, the first thing is you want to use stuff that's fluid. Remember we talked about percentages? All right, you'll want to use percentages. That's the first thing. The second thing is you'll want to be able to scale your images. If I had an image that's this big, that looks really good on it, like if I'm on a projector unit, how is that going to look on a phone? You know what I'm saying? It's like you don't want to see an eye of a human being, for example. So it's that kind of thing. And we have to work with also sizing fonts. So we'll talk about all that stuff. The way you do it is you use what are called media queries. And guess what? This is actually the first time. It's not really programming, but it sort of is. So you'll get to see sort of programming, all right, if you've never have before. Then they end up giving you a very large example that has responsive design. All right. Now look at this, because this is about as simple as it gets. Responsive web design means that your web page responds or adapts gracefully to whatever the medium is you're looking at it with. That's it. That's all it is. All right. I mean, so don't make it any harder than that, because it isn't any harder. So again, the 3 components of this: fluid layout. So you're going to use percentages. You don't want to use points and pixels, because again, they're absolute measurements. All right. So it's fluid layout, and the fluid layout in here is done with percentages. Media queries, so we can adjust based on the different screen size. I already showed you a very simple example of that. All right. And scalable images. That's what the chapter's about more than anything else. Now there's 2 ways that you can do this, just so you know. If I go out on my phone, okay, I still subscribe, not on my phone, but I still subscribe to the newspaper in Milwaukee. All right, and I sometimes read it on my phone, and I sometimes read it on my laptop. Okay, and if I read it on my phone, I go out to what's called Journal Sentinel online.com. That makes sense? That's if I go out to it on my laptop. If I go out to it on my phone, it's m_jsonline.com. They built a special mobile part for it. So what you can do is, if you've already got an existing website, you can either adapt it so that it'll handle both mobile and non-mobile, or you can build another one. You see what I'm saying? That's what they did. They've literally got another website. There's 2 of them. One that handles everything non-mobile, and one that handles everything mobile. The recommendation is today, if you're making a new website, you do what's called mobile first. It's much harder to program for this than it is to program for this. All right? All right. So how to test for responsive design? Well, there are a lot of ways. And I've shown you some of them, but I'm going to show you this again. You may remember this, you may not. In fact, let's bring that one up. See that? I'm going to hit F12. I don't know if you remember this or not. If I hit F12 and I come over here, toggle device toolbar. See that? That's got widescreen landscape, but I can come in here and I can choose my option as far as what I want to be using for this. That's how this would look on an iPad. That's how this would look on an iPhone 10. See what I'm saying? So that's one way you can check. Anybody want to guess what these numbers are?
Is there a dimension?
Yeah, width and height. So if I want to see what something would look like on a Galaxy, which is what I have, that's what it would look like. You say, well, that button is too big. Then I'd know I'd have to change things. When this app was made, I actually took it from a class that I had taken in the past, and I modified it. All right, we'll talk about it some more in a little bit. But that's what they're talking about here. So one way to do it is to just, I mean, if you literally have copies of every browser there is, and every version of every browser, then you can test it on there, right? You think that's a pain in the butt? I sure would. You know, there's some browsers have got 20, 30, 40 different versions out there. So typically you use an emulator, and that's what I just showed you, was an emulator or a simulator. All right? And there are ones that are built in. Ours is in the developer tools. All right, so that's what I just showed you on here. Okay. So how to implement fluid design. Fixed design versus fluid design. Here's the thing. Remember how I told you that? Percentages. This expects, if it's fixed, it's always going to be that width. You don't want it that way. I probably told you this in the past, but in case I did not, it happens somewhere around the beginning of 2016. More people today access the internet using mobile devices than non-mobile devices. Before that, it was always more with laptops and desktops. Not anymore. There's a commercial on right now. I don't know what he's even for. I think it's for some phone company. And they talk to a bunch of people in there. And one woman says, she's holding her phone. She says, this is my life. This is my company. And a lot of people, that's true. Everything they do basically is based off their phone. All right? I used to hang out when I lived in Illinois with a guy who was a steel salesman. And that's how he did everything. You know, not just phone calls, but orders and everything else. Okay? So look at this. Fixed width, 960 pixels. Fluid width, 100%. Fixed width, 600 pixels. Fluid width, 65%. Fixed width, 360. Fluid width, 37.5. The idea is you want things to be fluid. So you will be using percentages. All right? The benefits is it scales. That's the biggest benefit. I can't put it any simpler than that. It scales. So it looks better on different devices. So it's 90%, whether it's 90% on here or on a tablet or on a laptop, doesn't matter. All right? So fixed means absolute measurements. Points, pixels, etc. Fluid means percentages. I mean, like I said, I can't say it any better than that. So how do you convert from fixed to fluid? There's different ways of doing it, but they give you a formula in here. Again, it's not that big a thing. You're all smart enough people to know that if it's 960, you know, you could make that into a percentage or take a percentage and make it into a number of pixels, etc. All right. Sizing fonts. It says in Chapter 4 of this book, we recommended that you use relative measurements for font size. You might remember it, you might not. Remember we said M's and Rems? You should always use M's and Rems, not pixels, not points. Why? Because again, M's and Rems are designed to scale. So when you look here, notice everything they've got. Font size, 100%. All right. And here, 1.75. So what is that? All right. 1.75 times 16 gives you 28. 1.5 times 16 gives you 24, etc. But all of them work with M's. I work with Rems. So what's the difference between a Rem and an M? All right. What happens when you use Rems is it bases everything on the default. So it bases everything on 16 pixels. But if you've changed it somewhere and you use M's, it'll base it on what you changed it to. To me, it's easier to write when you use Rems. But you'll learn over time. You'll use both, and you'll see which one you like better, and that's the one you'll probably use. All right? All right, images. Notice, I set the max width property for the image to 100%. What that means when you do that is you're telling the image to take up as much of the screen area that you've delegated to it as it'll take up. That's what it means.
So it's saying use the full page.
No. It's saying the area on the page that you've delegated for it, use that.
Okay. So
Right.
test.
So again, it's like if I said, this is your room, decorated any way you want, as opposed to this is your school, decorated any way you want. See what I'm saying? All right. So the idea is that's how much room it'll take. You might say, well, why didn't it go all the way out to here? Because you probably put it in a div or something where you split it right there, and there's one half, and there's one half, etc. So if you see that, now if you want to limit, you can give it pixels. Notice, max width says take up as much as you can. This says 100% of 400 pixels. Does that make sense? So how do you learn that? You sit and play with it. You don't learn it from me sitting there and going over PowerPoints and chapters and stuff with you. You learn by playing with it. So we are going to go over an example of this stuff. Because again, that's how you learn it. So as it says, to create a scalable image, remove height and width. All right, set the max width. Okay. All right. So here's an example of a web page with fluid design. Now, it may look good, may not look good. That isn't even the point. But you start to think about, okay, when I make this more narrow, what do I want to have happen? Okay, does that make sense? So think about this. If I started, I'm not going to do it because it's not, this is a screenshot. But if I started to make this narrower, well, chances are that San Joaquin Valley Town Hall wouldn't fit on one line. Would you agree with that? I might want to make the font size smaller, and I might want to make it basically so it was over multiple lines. Sometimes when you do this, you either want the logo by itself, centered at the top of the page, like for a phone, or maybe you don't want it in there at all. This, have you ever seen a menu? Let's see if we can find one. I know I can bring one up in other ways, but have you ever seen when you make something small enough? Let's see. There. Did you ever see this? This is literally called a hamburger menu. When you get the, I didn't make up the term, but when you have this and you click here and then it shows you stuff, see that? What we will talk about probably in about a month, few weeks, I don't know, is we'll talk about a built-in package called Bootstrap. And Bootstrap does that. So when you make the menu narrow enough, it doesn't show you any options. Let's see, I don't know if this works like that or not. Okay, but we can look. See all these options, all this stuff up here? All right. So what that is, this is an example of a responsive page. Do you see that? See how wide the picture is? Now do you see how wide the picture is? All right. So they made it responsive. All right. That's the kind of thing you're supposed to learn in this chapter. So it says the web page in this example uses a fluid layout. In other words, it's going to use percentages. All right. And the widths, the margins, and the padding are all done with percentages. The images, it says, are scalable. The logo, it can be scalable. All right. The font sizes are in M's. It says, but they don't change. If you want to change them, you use CSS Media Queries. That's what's next. Now, let's just break away from this for a second and look at what I showed you before. This is a media query. This says right there, if you look on the screen, this says if the maximum height of what you're working with is 500 pixels or less, do this. This one says if the minimum width is 1201 pixels, that's the minimum, or higher, you do this. And you might look and say, wait a minute, there you said min width, there you said max height. It's because that one is landscape, all the other ones are portrait. All right? There's a little order in this. You don't have to necessarily do it this way, but it's how I did it. So look at what we have. This says always do this. Always do this stuff. So this is the CSS for the body, for the H1 tags, for buttons. Now, this says only do this, okay, only do this if the maximum width is 500 pixels. So it can't be 0. That wouldn't make any sense. But if you looked at when I showed you those emulators, usually about the smallest you can get that down to on an old flip phone. All right, yeah, people still have old flip phones. All right, my brother actually just got rid of his about a few months ago. But probably the minimum width on that would be about 200 pixels. So 200 to 500 pixels, that should be red. All right, and it should display that. That's the one that's set on there. What was the heading? Smartphone. It was red and it said smartphone. All right. The next one says if you're between 501 pixels and 768 pixels, make the background blue and display tablet. Does that make sense? So notice up to and including 500, 501 to 768, 769 to 1200, and 1200 and beyond. Okay? So when you specify a media query, you're specifying how you want something to look when your medium that you're looking at it with is either a certain width or a certain height. Okay? That's exactly what they're saying right here. And these are different things that you can set. Now this is in that viewport. Remember this? We've done this before. That's one of the things that you get by default. Remember when you do your exclamation point, you hit tab in Visual Studio Code? That's one of the lines you get. Viewport means whatever you're using to look at the website with. So it's your phone, it's your laptop, it's a desktop, it's a tablet, doesn't matter. All right, it could be your refrigerator. Okay. The content where it says content equal width equal device width, that means use the width of the device. And initial scale equal 1 means use 100% of that. That's what it means. I'll take your question. Does that make sense? All right, yes.
Why wouldn't you use that literally all the time?
It is used almost all the time. But the thing is, it's a fairly recent development.
Oh, okay.
All right? I mean, you know, again, I know I'm dating myself here, but when I was your age, no one had a cell phone. You know, when I started as a programmer, literally the machine that I had was it sat on the desktop and it was higher than it was wide. So it was about this high, but it was only about that wide. And believe me, you couldn't have gotten if you even had a case for it, it was about 75 pounds. So it's not like you'd carry it around with you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Now, today, this phone is more powerful than that computer was. All right? But the advent of a lot of this stuff is really only about 20 years old. It really is. All right? And now I look, you know, and I've told you this before, but that's my granddaughter. And all kidding aside, she's probably better with a phone than I am. I sometimes have trouble finding things. My wife really has trouble. All right? And she'll give her iPad to a 2-year-old. And she can find stuff out on the internet. She has memorized the pattern. You know what I'm saying? All right. So it says the viewport determines the content that's displayed on the screen. All right. It says you use the meta to control the viewport settings. All right. It says when you use media queries, that's the main reason you're using this. So if you leave that line out, it won't understand your media queries. So in other words, if you look in here at the example that I showed you, we've got that line right here. This one. Now, let's try to take that line, and I'm going to comment it out. Just that line. All right? Then I'm going to come back. You saw it run. Right there. There's no problem with it, but let's run it now. All right? You go, oh, no, it still works. All right? Probably because it's cached what's in there. Let's put it in the memory. But I think if we kept doing this, it would stop working. All right? This is, for lack of better words, sending a message to the browser that we want the ability to come in here and use media queries.
Why wouldn't you use that instead of using all the text below it?
All this does, right there, that just says use all the room on whatever you're using to look at this with that you can. That's all it says. That's literally all this says. So it says if you're using a phone, set it up for 100%. If you're using a laptop, set it up for 100%.
So,
but it's not doing it pixelated.
okay.
It's not doing it on a size. It's doing it based on a device.
Okay.
All right?
So
And it's very easy to override this.
Stuff.
It's easy to override this. It's virtually impossible to override that. All right? The only way that you can override it is if I have two things in here. So if for some stupid reason, this would be stupid, if down below this one, I had another one that said at media min width 501 and max width 768, and I put stuff down here in another one, that would override this.
Yeah, my question is what do you mean by overriding?
What I'm saying is, look on the screen here.
Cancel out each other?
Yes.
Okay.
Look on the screen right here. This says 501 to 768, right? What if I fat fingered and did this? I wouldn't get any error, but the system would try to make everything blue as long as my width was more than 501 pages, correct? All right? So if it did that, then it would be overridden here because, no, that says 769 to 1200. So it would override because it comes after it. And then it would override it again here because it comes after that. All right? Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. So they talk about how to code these. This is probably for your next test. This page 299, it may be almost the most important page for the test. They don't have much on here, but they start explaining it to you. All right? So also notice when you ask your question, Max, look, browsers that support media queries. That's most browsers. But there are still people out there that are running IE8. You might laugh or say, well, why? Because, yeah, because it works. Because they don't realize there's something better. I mean, this was, I can't tell you how many years ago, but this was a few years ago. I went and visited my brother. I hadn't even seen him in about a year. All right, but I was up in north central Wisconsin where he lives. And he was showing me something on his laptop. And I said, and it was really acting slow and it looked weird. I said, what's your browser? And he said, Internet Explorer. And this was around, this is how long ago it was. It was when IE6 was out. It was a few years ago, right? And I said, what version are you using? He goes, I don't know. So we went into the help and looked at he had version 2. I said, why didn't you upgrade? I don't know, everything works fine. So I showed him how to upgrade. I said, you can do whatever you want to do, but this is how you upgrade your browser. So I showed him how to do it. Oh, maybe I will. Okay. All right. So here's some common. This is probably even more important. 301. Take a look. This is almost just like the example I gave you. Look on the screen. Tablet, mobile, etc. All right. Again, you learn how to do this stuff by doing this stuff. Period. All right. Now they come in and they talk about this. It says How to build a responsive menu using SlickNav plugin. Let's try to make this easy. All right. A plugin is something that you can literally add to your code. All right. It's something someone else has written that when you download it, you can use it as though it was yours. It's not cheating if it's a public plugin. Now, if Max writes a plugin and doesn't make it available for anybody, but Keegan gets a copy of it and copies it over, that's a different thing. All right? But there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of plugins. It used to be Flash was just a plugin. Not everybody had it, not everybody wanted it. So you could add it. All right? Well, an example of a plugin is this SlickNav. And they tell you here that if you go out and you download it, okay, it'll allow you to create a menu like this. And what I mean is you can create the menu without having to write all the HTML. You're learning how to create it with the HTML. So you're like, oh, why would I want to do that if this exists? All right. Why? Because, again, there are millions of websites already out there that don't use this plugin. And you have to be able to maintain what's out there. There are literally hundreds of plugins that are like this. All right? And there's different ways that you can do the same thing. So the author says, if you want to use the SlickNav plugin, download the associated zip file from slicknav.com, unzip it, add it to your slicknav.css and jQuery.slicknav.min.js to your website. This file would go in your CSS folder. Does that make sense, this file? This file would go in your JS folder. We haven't done anything with JavaScript yet, but you need to add them both. Once you add them both and you link to them on your HTML page, then you can use the stuff that's in there. Does that make sense? Yes.
You answered.
Okay. So the chapter ends by showing you this web page. This is over about 10 pages. So it says a web page that uses responsive web design. Then they first show you the design. Now again, you might look at this and say, man, that's really ugly. And not to be funny or whatever, that's not the point of this. The point is, look at what they've got. This is what it would look like on a desktop. This would be a phone, and it would be a phone in portrait layout. This would be a phone, and it's a phone in landscape layout. Can you see the differences already in how it's laid out? That's the key thing. All right? You will have a certain amount of this on your next test. I'll ask you to write, and they won't be detailed, but I'll ask you to write some media queries. All right? So here's my question to you, because this is what I was thinking of doing probably next Monday. And I may have shown you this already, so if I already did, hey, sorry about that. But I've got a question for you. I've been doing stuff for my other class, so I got a bunch of junk here. So I'm going to ask you this question, and you answer yes or no, please. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to say, all right. This was that website, and I think I'd even shown this to you earlier in the semester.
Yeah.
But the question is this. If we were to go in there and look at this and create this as a class, try that again. Create this as a class and started doing this, would that help your understanding? Because I would show you the media queries. So we can spend, Monday we can take one of our written tests and then spend the rest of the period doing this. That's what I was thinking of doing for a test review. All right? Well, that's at least two of you who are saying yes. All right? And if you look, here's the About page. Same kind of thing. All right? You can see what it looks like there. You can see what it looks like here. See that? All right? We've got a Contact page. And that Contact page, as you shrink it, you see how it looks different? All right? Now, I am not going to lie to you and say, well, we're going to do this because I wrote this, and doggone it, it's one of the best things ever written. No, it's okay. I spent an afternoon doing this over the summer. So if you didn't catch that, what I said was, we'll write this as a class on Monday. So you'll have that. I think that'll help. So next week, Tuesday or Wednesday, when you do your test on chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8, you'll have something to go by. All right? So again, the author shows you what this is going to look like. This is the kind of thing, I want you to understand something. What you are doing right now in this class, whether you realize it or not, is you're doing web programming. That's what you're doing. And you can say, we haven't programmed anything. Putting in HTML, putting in CSS, putting in JavaScript is basically web programming. Web design, you get a little of it, but that's what you do first. You start to think about, what do I want my page to look like? Does that make sense? All right. Now, you may have done this before, you may not have, and I know I think you all downloaded it, but I don't know if it worked or not. If I have time, what I'll try to do this weekend is, remember when we looked at that balsamic mock-up thing?
Yeah.
We'll try to write this first in that. So you'll see how each page will look. You understand what I'm saying? And then we'll go and convert it into the actual website. Writing it in the balsamic mock-up, that's more website design. All right? Okay. So what they talk about then, notice it says the page uses a fluid layout and scalable images. It also uses media queries. All right. The portrait for the page is identical to desktop, and the tablet layout, except for they made the font sizes smaller. The reason I thought of doing this with you on Monday is, after we get done, you can play with it. I would make a copy of everything we do, just grab the whole folder, make a copy of it, and play with it till your heart's content. Change font sizes, font colors, and whatever as sizes change. That's how you learn. All right? So they show you the HTML for the page, and what's new? Well, notice they've got in here nav ID equal mobile menu and nav ID equal nav menu. What is that? If you've got the mobile menu, it's not showing. It's there. See that there and here? That's that hamburger thing with the 3 lines. So you have to press that to show it. So that's on a mobile device. But on a non-mobile device, you've got room to show it all. This will also, when you click this, it's going to show it vertical, not horizontal like you see here. All right? The CSS, as you'd guess, that's where there's going to be a lot of changes. You say, no, there aren't any. Yes, there's a lot of them. All right? And that is when you start adding the media queries. Also, see this? See this line right here, this thing that's in blue? When this says display none, that means make it invisible. Doesn't mean remove it. It means make it invisible. You don't want that menu to show when it's for the mobile device. So we're telling that regular menu to not display. We're making it invisible. All right, then there's some media queries here. You can see them. They show you some more CSS. Again, then they make the mobile thing. All right? And that's it. Now, before we finish up, because we're almost done, again, I'd strongly suggest you take the time and go over the summary. All right?
That's 314.
314 and 315, yeah. All right? Let's do 2 more things. First, let's go in and let's look at, as soon as it comes up, let's look at the shape up and the Halloween for Chapter 8. So it says here, in this exercise, you'll enhance the home page so it uses a responsive design. It looks really similar to what we did in Chapter 7, just so you know. So what are we doing? It says make a copy of your main CSS style sheet. Do you hear that? Make a copy. Don't use the regular one, make a copy, and call it main RWD for responsive web design. Then modify the HTML for the page so it uses this style sheet. All right? In other words, you want to make them both available, but the only one you want to use is this one. So, what's that? You just, the link statement, you just change it. Where it says link rel equals style sheet href equals, instead of saying href equals css/main.css, you'll say href equals css/main RWD. You can comment out the other one or remove it. All right, either way. Modify the page so it uses a fluid layout. What does that mean? Right now, you want to go into the body and you want to say max width 1024, right? Then you want to set the width basically to 95%. So you're saying it can't be any bigger than 1024. But no matter what I'm reading it on, use 95% of the width. That's kind of nice. Have you ever done that? Have you ever looked at something on your phone that literally is using 100% and it's so pushed to the edge it's kind of hard to read what's on the edges? With 95%, you're giving yourself a little bit of margin on each side. All right, that's why they're saying. All right. If you use pixels for anything previously, you can convert them either to ems or rems. I'd recommend you use rems. But if you say, no, I want to use ems, then use ems. So look, because there's more. Make the images scalable. Make sure the width is limited to 140 pixels and it can't be reduced to less than 70. I'm going to let you figure that out. It's going to take a little work. All right? Specifications for the media query are shown right there. All right, so you'll add a media element and you'll add some stuff down here. Now, the hardest part of this is they want you to add this slick nav. See this? That's the way it's going to look when you get done. All right, so it'll take some work. And that's it for this one. So it shows you what it should look like in a mobile format, etc. All right, this is probably the most work that you've had to do on one of these exercises. All right, and the Halloween one is similar. Again, we're making it responsive. It says make a copy, name it main, etc. Do the same thing. You're basically, when you do the first one, you're almost done with the second one. All right. Now, I'm going to tell you this. I didn't put it in this order, but when I do these, I do the Halloween one first. I think it's easier to work with than the other one. Part of it is because it's more graphical. It's easier to see how stuff is laid out. And when you do one, you've almost got the other one done. I find it's easier to do that one. If you don't agree, then do the other one first. Doesn't really matter. All right. But see what I mean? Keegan, this is the way we'll do it next time, is we'll use Flexbox. All right. So what I'm going to do, grab this.